VR cinema, cinematic VR, 360-degree video, whatever you call it. How does it work? The answer is, we don't know, but we sort of do. Kinda. We got an idea. Traditional cinema has had more than 100 years to work out the kinks, so you're gonna have to forgive us as we mill out the finer details. However, that's not to say VR filmmakers haven't made massive strides in the short time the medium has been around. With that said, here's a personal philosophy on VR cinematography. There appears to be three main styles of VR films: first-person POV, omnistatic, and omnidynamic. So I just made up these names. You can call them whatever the hell you want, I don't care. First-person POV is fairly self-explanatory. We are the character in the narrative. We see the world through their eyes. Omnistatic is like a fly-on-the-wall perspective. You are positioned in the scene and there you stay until the events unfold around you. You're privy to everything, your presence doesn't have an effect on the events, and you're stuck in one spot. Omnidynamic is just like omnistatic, it's a fly-on-the-wall perspective. However, you move within the scene, you get the best view of the events in either a fluid motion or by cutting. I find it odd that last one comes with a bit of controversy. Why? You can't cut in VR and that. It doesn't work, so that. Alright, but hear me out for a sec. So many people want to believe that the traditional grammar of cinematography can't be applied to a 360-degree space. It can! But you have to be willing to work it out mentally. And remember that it's all new, so when it doesn't work your first try, not to throw your hands up and say, "Well, I couldn't do it, so that must mean it's impossible." Let me walk you through this. Stop thinking of VR as plugging into the Matrix and start thinking of it as a movie screen. A screen that just so happens to stretch around your viewer completely. One of the popular things to say about VR films is that it is a frameless medium. I had an art teacher once who told me that the world is made of frames, that we're constantly looking at things through frames. And the way that we position ourselves, we are constantly finding a frame to look at. And then look, it looks like this when you're editing it, alright? It is one big frame stretched over a sphere with multiple little frames made through composition inside of it. Now, how is the viewer watching? Are they standing, sitting, inverted? This is something you're going to need to make clear at the beginning, be it in instructions or on screen. With this information in mind, you can begin tailoring the experience around the viewer. For the most part, I assume that the viewer is going to be sitting. It's the most likely scenario given the current viewing options. It also goes back to the most basic form of storytelling. We sit around the campfire, not stand. And honestly, my legs and back hurt, so if you're going to tell me a story of any length, I'm going to have a seat.
You newfangled kids with the VR's making me stand up all the time. I work all day, damn it.
So assuming they are sitting, we can now divide the screen they are watching into different zones. I personally divide it up into 6 fields of view. You can call them whatever you want, you can divide it however you want, but this is just generally how I got through the process. There's the main field of view directly in front of the audience. It is within this field of view that most of the primary action should occur. To the left and right of the main field of view are the peripheral fields of view. This field of view is unfocused and stretches a little past the viewer's face. Action that occurs here should be secondary to the story, or action that will cause the viewer to reorient and establish a new frame. Directly to the left and right of the peripheral fields of view are the rotation fields of view. These fields require the viewer to turn his or her head in order to see the action. This effort by the viewer should be considered when putting action into these fields of view as to help prevent any neck strain. The field directly behind the viewer's head is the blind spot. This field requires the most effort of the viewer as they have to turn around in order to see what's happening. While this space can and should be used at times, there should be a very deliberate reason why. If the viewer is going to have to work to see the story, there needs to be a payoff for it. And don't just switch the action to happening there and leave me there. That's painful. The one thing that bothers me the most about VR films is when they split my attention across hemispheres. Don't do that. If there's something important to the story happening, I want to be able to see it. The front of the camera needs to be established. While a VR camera films in all directions at once, in order to guide a viewer's gaze within the chosen frame, we have to know what it is they'll be seeing first when they're placed in the scene. Knowing where the eyes are on the camera, we can now establish the best possible viewing areas for any given action within the context of the story. By putting on a VR headset, the viewer is surrendering their head to the filmmaker. The filmmaker must then show them the world they have created for the story to take place in. They must guide their view across a massive screen. If one keeps this in mind, then movement, cuts, close-ups, the rest of the cinematic grammar becomes available to the filmmaker. Even rapid cutting, assuming the goal is to disorient the viewer, is possible. I set out to put my theories into practice by filming a VR short film. I wanted to put as much traditional cinematic grammar into the film as I could. Basically, because everyone kept telling me that I couldn't. I'm gonna show you guys. You guys pick on me, I'm gonna show you. The first thing that I realized while shooting in this style is that as soon as the camera starts moving, the 180-degree rule comes into existence. Many current filmmakers feel that the 360-degree environment eliminates the line. And yes, if the camera is from the point of view of a character or a static invisible viewer, there is no line. But this is also true of traditional cinema. If the camera stays in one place for the entire film, then the line is inconsequential. But as soon as the camera begins to change place, the filmmaker has to be cautious of disorienting the viewer. The best way not to disorient them is to maintain the line. Inside the VR environment, eye trace becomes tremendously important. If the viewer's gaze is coaxed to the right in one shot, the next shot had better begin with the action happening to the right. If they are coaxed to the right, and the next cut has action happening to the left, then it's likely they will miss out. This did tend to complicate blocking and camera placement, so ultimately I found myself working the point of interest back toward center. In the description, I'll link to a very good essay about eye trace. I found eye trace in VR to be so important that I worked it into my shot list beforehand. I started a scheme where next to the shot list I'd draw a circle. I'd mark in the general area where the action would occur from the perspective of a fisheye lens looking out onto the scene. If there was movement in the scene that would lead us to another area, I'd mark the movement, then I could begin the next shot from this area. The final product was far from perfect. I knew going into it my stitch was going to be bad, so I didn't even worry about it. And that wasn't even the point. The point was to practice the cinematography. And for the most part, everything worked. A good example is the two conversations I had in my film. The first one was shot earlier, and I tried more experiments with it. The result? The viewers felt like the cutting in this scene was more abrupt and jarring. However, I followed up with, did at any point you lose track of where you were in the room? The answer, no. I also asked, did at any point you lose track of the narrative? The answer, no. So what this tells me is that not that the cuts didn't work, it's that the cuts didn't match the context of the scene. It's two guys sitting on the couch. Why are the cuts abrupt? Neither one of these characters should be feeling anything that matches these cuts. With the conversation at the end, I chose fewer and slower cuts. This matched the context of the scene and people had no issue with it. There were a few things I couldn't have seen coming, but the viewers never seemed to lose track of the narrative, and that's what's truly important here. It doesn't matter how you film it doesn't matter what you believe you can or can't do, without a story, without the character, without an arc, a beginning, a middle, and end, you have nothing. So there you have it, my personal philosophy on VR cinematography, which it's a growing, living philosophy. It's going to change, it's going to expand. Just keep that in mind.